During an argument, my son-in-law shouted, "You're not even really part of the family." He froze when the lawyer showed who actually owned the land the house was built on. "Your presence here means so much to me. Watch until the end and leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far my story has reached." During an argument, my son-in-law shouted, "You're not even a real part of this family." He froze when the lawyer showed who actually owned the land where the house was built. I still remember the sting of those words, how they hung in the air of the kitchen I had helped design 5 years ago. Mark's face was red with anger. His finger pointed at me like I was some stranger who had wandered in from the street. Not the mother of his wife. Not the grandmother of his son. "Mom, maybe you should go," Sarah whispered, her eyes fixed on the floor. She couldn't even look at me. My own daughter choosing him. Again. I gathered my purse with shaking hands. 65 years old, and being thrown out of my daughter's house like a teenage troublemaker. All because I had suggested they replace the leaking roof before it caused water damage to the second floor. "It's my house, my decisions," Mark had sneered when I brought it up. "We'll fix it when we have the money." "I could help with that," I had offered, which was apparently the match that lit the powder keg. "We don't need your charity," he had shouted. "You're always trying to control everything, trying to buy your way into our lives. Newsflash, Brenda. You're not even a real part of this family." As I walked to my car, I could hear Sarah making excuses for him. "He's just stressed about work. You know how he gets." Did know. I've been watching it for 10 years. Watching my sweet, confident daughter shrink a little more each year. Walking on eggshells around his ego. Making herself smaller to make him feel bigger. The drive home to my empty house was a blur. Ever since Gerald died 5 years ago, the silence had been my constant companion. My husband of 40 years, gone from a heart attack with no warning. We were supposed to travel in our retirement, see all the places we'd put off during our working years. Instead, I was alone, with only my daughter and grandson to fill the void Gerald left behind. And now it seemed I didn't even have them. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, staring at nothing. Mark had always been dismissive of me, but he'd never been so openly hostile. Something had changed. Something had him scared. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Sorry about today. Mark says sorry too." He didn't mean it. But he did mean it. And we both knew he hadn't actually apologized. I set the phone down without responding. For 10 years, I'd watched my son-in-law chip away at my daughter's confidence, isolate her from friends, control their finances. I'd bitten my tongue because Sarah always defended him. "He loves me, Mom. He's just protective." Gerald had seen through Mark from the beginning. "That boy's going to be trouble," he'd said after first meeting him. But Sarah was in love, and nothing we said made a difference. So instead we'd made our own arrangements. Preparations for a day we hoped would never come, but feared might. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder marked, "Family Trust." Inside was the deed to the land where Sarah and Mark's house now stood. The land that Gerald and I had purchased 30 years ago as an investment property. The land we had offered as a gift when Sarah and Mark got married, allowing them to build their dream home without the burden of a land mortgage. The land that was still legally in my name. Mark didn't know this. Sarah knew but had apparently forgotten over the years, or chosen to ignore it. I had never intended to use this as leverage. It was just our way of making sure Sarah always had a safety net, a backup plan if things went wrong. Gerald and I had seen too many women trapped in bad marriages because they had nowhere else to go. But now, as I looked at the deed, a different thought formed. Maybe it was time to remind Mark exactly where he stood, and who really owned the ground beneath his feet. I picked up my phone and called Patricia Wilson, our family lawyer for over 20 years. "Pat," I said when she answered, "I need to talk to you about the Sanders property. I think it's time to revisit the arrangement." For the first time since Gerald died, I felt a spark of something other than grief or resignation. Felt purpose. Mark wanted to act like I wasn't part of the family. Fine. Then I'd stop acting like family too. Family doesn't get evicted. Family doesn't get told they don't belong. Tenants, on the other hand. The next morning, I sat across from Patricia in her office, sunlight streaming through the blinds behind her desk. She hadn't changed much in the 20 years I'd known her. Still the same no-nonsense attitude, graying hair cut in a practical bob, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the documents spread before her. "Well, Brenda, the deed is crystal clear," she said, looking up. "The land is still solely in your name. When Sarah and Mark built the house, we created a simple agreement giving them the right to build on your property, with the understanding that the land would transfer to Sarah, not to both of them, after 15 years. Which is 5 years from now," I said quietly. "Exactly. Until then, you have full legal rights to the land. The house is a bit more complicated since they paid to build it, but they did so as tenants on your property." She removed her glasses. "May I ask what prompted this visit? You and Gerald were very specific that this arrangement was only meant as protection for Sarah." I stared out the window for a moment, memories washing over me. The land had been our first major purchase after Gerald and I married. We were young, just starting our careers. Gerald as a high school science teacher, me as a nurse at County General. Everyone said we were crazy to stretch ourselves so thin to buy an empty plot of land, but Gerald had vision. "One day we'll build our dream home here," he'd said, standing on that empty field with his arm around my waist. "When we've saved enough. And if we never do, it'll still be a good investment for our kids." We did eventually save enough, but by then we'd grown attached to our small colonial downtown. So the land remained untouched, appreciating in value year after year. When Sarah and Mark got engaged, they'd been struggling to find a place they could afford. Housing prices had skyrocketed, and even with 2 incomes, they were priced out of the neighborhood they wanted. "We should offer them the land," Gerald had suggested one night over dinner. "As a gift," asked surprised. It was worth a considerable amount by then. Gerald's eyes had twinkled. "Not exactly. I like Sarah's young man well enough, but there's something about him that concerns me. Let's keep the land in your name, just as a precaution. They can build whatever house they want on it. Won't that seem strange?" asked. Gerald had shrugged. "We'll tell them it's for tax reasons. Most young couples don't ask too many questions when they're being handed a gift." He'd been right. Sarah and Mark had been thrilled, and if Mark thought it odd that we kept the land in my name, he never said so. Perhaps he'd forgotten over the years. Perhaps he'd never known. Sarah handling the paperwork while he focused on house plans. Looking back at Patricia now, I explained what had happened the day before. "I see," she said when I finished. "And what exactly do you want to do, Brenda?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I can't exactly evict my own daughter and grandson." "No, but you could serve notice to Mark that you're terminating his right to occupy the property. Since Sarah is a named party in the original agreement and he isn't, you have grounds." I shook my head. "Sarah would never forgive me." Patricia leaned forward. "Brenda, may I speak frankly? I've known you a long time. This doesn't sound like just one bad day with your son-in-law. What's really going on?" The concern in her eyes broke something loose inside me. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything. How Mark controlled all their money, how Sarah had to ask permission for basic purchases, how she'd given up her career as a pediatric nurse because Mark thought it was more important for their son to have a stay-at-home mom. How I'd watched my confident, independent daughter slowly disappear. "I think he's in financial trouble," I finished. "He's been secretive lately, according to Sarah. Stressed about money. That's probably why he reacted so strongly when I offered to help with the roof." Patricia nodded slowly. "I understand your concern. But tread carefully, Brenda. Legal action should be your last resort, not your first." "I know," I sighed. "I don't want to create more problems." "That said," Patricia continued, sorting through the papers, "let's make sure everything is in order, just in case. And perhaps we should discuss what options you do have if things escalate." As we went through the documents, I remembered Gerald's words from years ago. "We need to make sure Sarah always has a way out." At the time I thought he was being overprotective. Now I wondered if he'd seen something in Mark that I'd missed. I left Patricia's office with a clearer understanding of my rights but no clearer idea of what to do next. Should I confront Mark? Tell Sarah about my concerns? Do nothing and hope it was just a bad day? As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? Just us. Maybe I wouldn't have to decide after all. Maybe Sarah was finally ready to talk. The coffee shop buzzed with morning energy. Baristas calling out orders, the hiss of steam wands, customers typing on laptops. I spotted Sarah in the corner, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. She looked exhausted. "Mom," she stood to hug me, the embrace lingering a moment longer than usual. "Thanks for meeting me." I settled into the chair across from her, noting how she nervously twisted her wedding ring. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" She stared into her cup. I wanted to apologize about Mark. He was completely out of line. "It's all right," I said automatically, the words bitter on my tongue. "It wasn't all right. Not even close." "No, it's not." Sarah looked up, surprising me with her firmness. "The way he spoke to you was unacceptable." I told him so. Hope flickered in my chest. "You did?" "Yes." Then her shoulders slumped. "But he's under so much pressure right now. His company is downsizing and he's worried about his position. That's why he snapped. He feels like a failure because our roof is leaking and he can't afford to fix it." And just like that, the excuses began again. I bit my tongue, remembering Patricia's advice to tread carefully. "Listen, Mom," Sarah continued, lowering her voice. "There's something else. Mark's been talking about selling the house." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Selling? Why?" "He says we need to leverage our assets. That we could sell, pay off some debts, and buy something smaller." She twisted her napkin. "I don't want to move. Jason loves his school, his friends. But Mark says we don't have a choice." My mind raced. Mark couldn't sell the house without dealing with the land ownership issue. Did he know that? Or was he planning to forge ahead and hope I wouldn't object? "What debts, Sarah?" I asked carefully. She shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Credit cards. Some investment thing that didn't work out." He doesn't really share the details with me. Of course he didn't. That would mean relinquishing control. "Have you seen the actual bills? The statements?" "Mom." Her tone sharpened with warning. "I trust my husband." The conversation shifted then to safer topics. Jason's baseball team, my garden, the new bakery down the street. But as we parted, Sarah hugged me fiercely again. "I love you, Mom," she whispered. "No matter what Mark says, you'll always be my family." I watched her walk away, my heart heavy. Something was very wrong in my daughter's marriage, and for the first time, I thought she might be starting to see it too. Instead of going home, I drove to the community center. I'd been avoiding it since Gerald died. It held too many memories of the art classes we'd taken together in retirement. But today I pulled into the parking lot with purpose. The spring catalog listed several classes still open for registration. On impulse, I signed up for watercolor landscapes and pottery basics. I needed to get out of my house, to stop obsessing over Sarah's problems when I couldn't fix them directly. "Brenda. Brenda Wilson." A voice called as I turned to leave. Eleanor Martinez stood there, her silver hair cut in a stylish bob I instantly envied. We'd been on the hospital fundraising committee together years ago. "Eleanor. It's been ages." I smiled genuinely for the first time in days. "Too long. Are you taking classes here now?" "Just signed up for 2, I admitted. "Wonderful. A bunch of us meet for lunch after Thursday pottery. You should join us." I hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd like that." As I drove home, I realized I'd been isolating myself since Gerald died. My world had narrowed to my empty house and my worries about Sarah. Maybe it was time to expand it again. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. Twice weekly classes at the community center. lunch with Eleanor and her friends, a lively group of women mostly my age, all with stories and laughter to share. I found myself looking forward to these outings, coming home with clay under my fingernails or watercolor techniques to practice. Sarah called occasionally but didn't visit. Each time she sounded more strained. Mark was working late. Mark was stressed. Mark thought they should look at smaller houses. Through my new friend Eleanor, whose son worked in real estate, I learned that Mark had indeed contacted several agents about listing their house. But when they requested property documentation, he'd gone silent. Meanwhile, Patricia had been quietly investigating Mark's financial situation through channels I didn't fully understand nor questioned. "It's worse than we thought," she told me during our third meeting. "He's got substantial gambling debts. Online poker, sports betting. He's maxed out 3 credit cards in his name and 2 in Sarah's. And he's taken a loan against his 401k. My stomach dropped. "Does Sarah know?" "Based on what you've told me, I doubt it." Patricia's expression was grim. "He's setting up to sell the house out from under her. Only he can't because of the land issue. I suspect he's trying to find a workaround. What can I do?" My voice sounded small even to my own ears. "For now, nothing overt. Keep documenting everything. Let him make the next move." She hesitated. "And Brenda, make sure your own finances are secure. People this desperate can do unpredictable things." I left her office feeling like I was preparing for war rather than trying to protect my daughter. But wasn't that what I was doing? Planning a counterattack against the man who had systematically isolated and controlled Sarah for years. That evening I received a text from my grandson Jason. "Grandma, Dad's acting weird. He told Mom we have to move." She was crying. "I don't want to move." My hands shook as I replied, trying to sound reassuring without making promises I couldn't keep. The battle lines were being drawn, whether I wanted them to be or not. The doorbell rang on a rainy Tuesday afternoon as I was unpacking my pottery supplies. When I opened the door, Sarah stood there, mascara streaking down her cheeks, hair damp from the rain. "Can I come in?" Her voice cracked like thin ice. I pulled her inside, wrapping her in a hug that she melted into. "What happened, sweetheart?" She couldn't speak at first, just sobbed against my shoulder like she had as a little girl after skinning her knee or fighting with a friend. I guided her to the couch, made hot tea, and waited. "Mark says we're listing the house next week," she finally said, clutching the mug between her hands. "He already has an agent. Some friend from work who'll do it for reduced commission." "And you don't want to sell," I said carefully. "It's not just that." Sarah set down her mug, hands trembling. "I found something, Mom. Credit card statements. So many of them, all maxed out. Some in my name that I never opened. And there were bank transfers to someone named Vanessa." Her voice caught. "Large transfers." My heart sank. Of course there was another woman. Men like Mark always had someone on the side. When I confronted him, he exploded. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's never been physical before, but he shoved me against the wall, told me I had no right to go through his things." Rage flared in my chest, hot and primal. "Did he hurt you?" "Just bruises on my arms." He apologized right away, said it would never happen again. That he's just stressed because we're in financial trouble and now is not the time for me to turn on him. I fought to keep my expression neutral. "Where's Jason?" "At baseball practice. Mark's picking him up after work." "Sarah." I took her hands in mine. "You don't have to go back there tonight." She pulled away. "Don't, Mum. I know what you're thinking, but it's more complicated than that. Mark's not himself right now." "No, he's exactly himself. This is who he's always been." The words escaped before I could stop them. Sarah stiffened. "You've never liked him." "That's not true. I wanted to like him. I tried for your sake. But I've watched for years as he's controlled and isolated you. I chose to stay home with Jason. I chose to give up nursing." "Did you?" Challenged gently. "Or did Mark convince you that's what a good mother would do?" She didn't answer, but I saw doubt flicker in her eyes. Sarah, there's something you need to know. I took a deep breath. About the house. I know, Mom. She interrupted, surprising me. I know you still own the land. I've always known. You have. Dad told me before he died. Said it was my insurance policy. If things ever went bad with Mark. A sad smile touched her lips. I was so angry at him for saying that. For not trusting my husband. And now I don't know what to think. She wrapped her arms around herself. Mark says he can sell the house even if we don't own the land. That the structure itself is ours to sell. That's not exactly how it works, I said carefully. Did he say anything about talking to me first? She looked away. He said he'd handle you. That you wouldn't cause problems once he explained the situation. I almost laughed at Mark's misplaced confidence. I see. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Mark says once we sell the house and clear the debts, we'll be fine. We can start over. I wanted to shake her to make her see what was happening. Her husband was drowning in debt, possibly having an affair, and had physically intimidated her. But I knew from raising a strong-willed daughter that pushing too hard would only make her dig in deeper. I just want you to be happy, I said instead. And safe. I am safe, she insisted. Mark's never done anything like that before. He was just surprised. I let it go for the moment. Why don't you stay for dinner? I can make that pasta you like. She checked her phone and winced. I can't. Mark's expecting me home to make dinner. Course he was. After Sarah left, I called Patricia. It's accelerating, I told her after explaining what Sarah had shared. And now there's been physical intimidation. I don't care about the money or the house anymore. I just want to get her and Jason away from him. This changes things, Patricia agreed. We need to document the physical incident while it's fresh. And we should move forward with formal notification regarding the land. What will that do? It puts any potential buyers on notice that there's a legal issue with the property, effectively preventing a sale. It also sends a clear message to Mark that you're aware of what he's trying to do. He'll be furious, I said, thinking of his hands on my daughter. Yes, he will. Which is why we need to make sure Sarah and Jason have somewhere safe to go when this blows up. I looked around my 3-bedroom house, with the spare room I'd kept exactly as Sarah had left it when she married, and the den that could easily convert to a bedroom for Jason. They can come here, I said firmly. All right. I'll prepare the papers. But Brenda, you need to have a conversation with Sarah first. She needs to know what's coming. I agreed, but as I hung up, doubt crept in. How could I tell Sarah what I was about to do without pushing her further away? She was already defensive about Mark, already primed to see me as the interfering mother-in-law. My phone pinged with a text from Sarah. Thanks for listening today. Please don't worry. Everything will be fine once we sell the house and move. Mark says we can even look for a place near you. The hollow promise made my chest ache. Mark had no intention of moving his family closer to me. He was saying whatever would keep Sarah compliant while he dismantled their life to cover his gambling debts and, quite possibly, set up a new life with someone named Vanessa. I texted back. I love you. You and Jason always have a home here if you need it. Then I called Eleanor. Remember that real estate agent son of yours? I need his help with something. The invitation came via text from Sarah. Family dinner Sunday at 5. Mark wants to discuss something important. I knew exactly what Mark wanted to discuss. Through Eleanor's son, I'd learned that Mark had listed the house with his friend 3 days ago. The listing wasn't public yet, but they already had an interested buyer. My hands trembled slightly as I replied. I'll be there. Patricia had prepared everything. The land ownership documents. The cease and desist letter preventing the sale. The restraining order application, ready to file if things got ugly. They sat in a manila folder in my purse, like a loaded gun. That Sunday, I arrived at Sarah's house exactly at 5, heart pounding. I'd asked Patricia to come with me, and she waited in her car down the street, ready to intervene if necessary. Jason greeted me at the door. His lanky 11-year-old frame taller each time I saw him. "Grandma!" He hugged me tight. "Did you bring cookies?" I smiled, handing him the tin of chocolate chip cookies I'd baked that morning. "Don't eat them all before dinner." "No promises," he grinned, already prying open the lid. Sarah appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Mom, you're right on time." Her smile seemed forced, her eyes darting nervously toward the living room where I could hear the murmur of a baseball game on TV. Mark didn't get up when I entered, just lifted his beer in greeting. "Brenda, glad you could make it." I nodded, noting how he'd positioned himself in Gerald's old recliner, the one piece of furniture we'd given them when they moved in. A subtle power play, claiming the patriarch's seat. Dinner was a tense affair. Sarah made small talk about Jason's baseball team, her garden, the new neighbors down the street. Mark ate silently, checking his phone repeatedly. Jason, sensing the tension, wolfed down his food and asked to be excused. "Actually, buddy, stick around," Mark said, setting down his fork. "This involves you too." Jason slumped back in his chair, exchanging a worried glance with Sarah. Mark cleared his throat. "So, we have some news." He reached for Sarah's hand, but she kept both hands in her lap. He noticed he didn't show it. "We've decided to make a change. A fresh start. We're selling the house," Sarah said quietly, not looking at me. "Got a buyer already," Mark continued, sounding pleased with himself. "Nice family, willing to close quickly. We'll be out by the end of next month." "I see," I said carefully. "And where will you go?" Mark's expression tightened slightly. "We're looking at apartments for now. Something more manageable." "Apartments?" Jason's voice cracked with teenage indignation. "You said we'd get another house." "We will, buddy, eventually. This is just temporary," Mark assured him. "But I don't want to leave. All my friends are here. My school, my team." "Jason, enough," Mark's tone hardened. "Sometimes adults have to make tough decisions. You'll make new friends." Sarah stared at her plate, defeated. I could see she'd given up fighting this battle. "Have you found an apartment yet?" asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Working on it," Mark said vaguely. "Look, Brenda, I know this might seem sudden, but it's a great opportunity. The housing market's hot, and our buyer is offering above asking." "How convenient," I remarked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Mark's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that it's all happening very quickly." An uncomfortable silence fell. Sarah stood abruptly. "Who wants dessert?" "I made apple pie." "Sounds lovely," I smiled at her. "Can I help you serve?" In the kitchen I whispered. "Are you sure about this, Sarah?" "No," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "But I don't have a choice. The debts are bad, Mom. Really bad." "There are always choices," I told her, squeezing her hand. When we returned with pie, Mark was showing Jason something on his phone, both laughing. A normal father-son moment that made me hesitate. Was I about to destroy my grandson's family? Was I overreacting? Then I saw the faint bruise on Sarah's wrist as she served the pie, partially hidden by her bracelet. My resolve hardened. "Actually," I said, setting down my fork, "I'd like to discuss the house sale." Mark's smile vanished. "What about it? I understand you've already found a buyer." He shifted in his seat. "Yeah, like I said, they're offering a good price. The thing is, Mark," I reached for my purse, "you can't sell the house." His face darkened. "Excuse me. You can't sell what you don't own," I said, withdrawing the folder Patricia had prepared. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, knowing what was coming. "What the hell are you talking about?" Mark demanded. "Of course we own the house. We built it." "You built the house," I agreed, sliding a document across the table. "But I own the land it sits on." His face went blank for a moment, then flushed deep red. "That's ridiculous. We've been living here for 10 years. Yes, on land that Gerald and I gave Sarah permission to build on. Land that has always remained in my name. Mark's eyes darted to Sarah. Did you know about this? She nodded slowly. Dad told me before he died. And you didn't think to mention it. His voice rose dangerously. Don't you dare yell at her, I said quietly but firmly. This arrangement was made to protect Sarah, and it seems that's exactly what it needs to do now. Protect her from what? Mark demanded, standing so abruptly his chair nearly toppled. From her husband trying to get their family out of debt. Debt that wouldn't exist if you hadn't spoiled her rotten, making her think she deserved fancy vacations and private schools. Mom, Dad, please stop, Jason pleaded. His young face crumpled with distress. Go to your room, Jason, Sarah said softly. But, now please. Her voice was gentle but firm. Once Jason had reluctantly gone upstairs, Mark rounded on me. You've always hated me. Always thought I wasn't good enough for your precious daughter. This isn't about you, Mark. It's about the fact that you're trying to sell property that isn't yours to sell. Mom, please, Sarah started, but Mark cut her off. No, let her talk. Let's hear what else she has to say. I took a deep breath. I know about the gambling, Mark. And Vanessa. The color drained from his face. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. Who the hell is Vanessa? She demanded. Mark's jaw worked wordlessly. The facade was crumbling, and we all knew it. I think, I said calmly, that we need to discuss what happens next. 6 months can change everything. I sat on my back porch, watching Jason practice his pitching in the yard while Sarah planted tomatoes in the raised garden beds Gerald had built years ago. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the scene, and for a moment, I could almost imagine my husband sitting beside me, nodding approvingly. You did it right, he would have said. You protected our girl. The night of the confrontation had been ugly. When Sarah demanded to know who Vanessa was, Mark's story unraveled completely. Vanessa was not a mistress as I'd suspected, but a gambling consultant who'd introduced Mark to high-stakes poker games and sports betting, taking a cut of his occasional winnings while encouraging him to chase his mounting losses. It's not what you think, he'd insisted. She was helping me. One big win and we'd be set for life. But there had been no big win, only big losses. Credit card debt, loans from shady characters, and plans to take the house money and flee, leaving Sarah to pick up the pieces. When Sarah asked him if he'd really intended to move them all to an apartment, his stammering response told her everything she needed to know. You were going to leave us, she'd whispered, the truth dawning in her eyes. Mark had exploded then, knocking over a chair, shouting that none of this would have happened if Sarah hadn't pushed him to keep up with her friends' lifestyles. If her mother hadn't constantly interfered. If Patricia, hearing the commotion from her car, had come to the door just as Mark stormed out, shoving past her. He'll be back, she'd warned us. Once he cools down and realizes what he's lost. She was right. The next day, he'd returned with flowers for Sarah, apologies, promises to get help. When those didn't work, he tried threats, about custody of Jason, about Sarah's credit being ruined alongside his. When those didn't work either, he'd resorted to begging. Through it all, Sarah had remained remarkably calm. It was as if seeing the full truth about her husband had lifted a weight from her shoulders. She'd filed for divorce the following week. The proceedings had been messy but quick. Mark had no real claim to the house, given the land situation. Patricia had arranged for a forensic accountant who discovered that most of the debt in Sarah's name had been taken out with forged signatures. And when Mark's gambling associates started showing up looking for money, he'd quickly agreed to a settlement that gave Sarah full custody with limited supervised visitation for him. Now, watching Sarah in the garden, I hardly recognized the defeated woman who had sat at that dinner table 6 months ago. She'd gone back to nursing part-time, reconnected with old friends, and started therapy. The bruises on her wrists had faded, but the determination in her eyes had only grown stronger. Jason had struggled at first, angry at his father, angry at me, angry at the world. But children are resilient. My grandson was finding his way, especially now that he had a stable home and a mother who was rediscovering her own strength. "Mom," Sarah called from the garden, "should we plant zucchini too?" "Only if you want to be giving it away all summer," I laughed, remembering Gerald's legendary zucchini harvests. She smiled, coming to sit beside me on the porch steps, her hands dirt-stained. "Dad always did end up sneaking zucchini onto the neighbors' porches in August." "Your father was many things, but subtle wasn't one of them," I chuckled. "He was right though," Sarah said quietly, watching Jason throw a ball against the side of the garage. "About Mark. About everything. He just wanted you to be happy. I know that now." She leaned her head against my shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. "I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner. You listened when it mattered most." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower. Jason eventually tired of pitching practice and came to flop dramatically on the grass near our feet. "Grandma," he said, squinting up at me, "can we have pizza for dinner?" "That depends," I answered solemnly. "Are you going to eat all the cookies again?" "Probably," he grinned, showing the gap where he'd recently lost a tooth. "Honesty deserves pizza," I decided, making him whoop with delight. Later, after pizza had been demolished and Jason was upstairs playing a video game, Sarah and I sat at the kitchen table with tea. The house was quiet, peaceful in a way it hadn't been when I lived here alone. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, turning her mug in her hands, "about the house." My heart sank a little. Of course she would want to move back eventually. "It's still there whenever you're ready," I assured her. "Actually, I was thinking we should sell it." I blinked in surprise. "But it's your home." She shook her head. "It was a house Mark chose, that Dad helped make possible, that you protected. But it never really felt like mine." She reached across the table for my hand. "This feels like home. Being here with you, watching Jason have his grandmother in his everyday life. Unless," she faltered, "you want your space back." "No," I said quickly, squeezing her hand. "No, I love having you both here." Relief flooded her face. "Then it's settled. We'll sell the house, pay off whatever debts are left, and maybe put some money aside for Jason's college. And for you," I insisted. "For whatever you want to do next." Sarah looked around the kitchen, at the watercolor paintings I'd done in my class now hanging on the walls, at the pottery bowl she'd made in the class she'd joined with me. "I think what I want," she said slowly, "is exactly what I have right now. Chance to rebuild. To remember who I was before Mark, and discover who I can be now." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Your dad would be so proud of you." "He'd be proud of you too, Mom. For keeping his promise to protect me, even when I didn't know I needed protecting." That night, after Sarah and Jason had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room with a photo of Gerald. "You were right," I whispered to his smiling face. "The land was the best investment we ever made." I paused, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. But not because of what it's worth now. Because of what it saved. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, washing away the last of winter and making room for new growth. Inside, in this house that had once felt too empty, too quiet, I finally felt complete again. Not because I'd won against Mark. Not because I'd been proven right. But because I'd built something much more valuable than a house. I'd rebuilt a family.